Our first speaker is an old co-conspirator of mine, good friend, Dr. Ariel Cohen. And you have his bio. I'd just like to indicate the range of this man's expertise, whether it is Russia and Eurasia, today's topic, Central and Eastern Europe, or the Middle East, and most recently, the energy security of the West. And Ariel is going to talk first, and he's going to talk to us about the strategic implications of energy and economics in the region. Ariel, please, the floor is yours.
Cześć Państwo. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The issue at hand today is European energy security. The imperative for peace is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, because if Europe is diversified and not dependent on one specific natural gas source, it will be more at peace than it is today. We have a war in Europe on our hands. There's no beating about the bush, around the bush on that. Just yesterday, the commander of the Western Russian military district, a Russian three-star, said the US started a hybrid war against Russia. And if they believe that, that's a problem with propaganda. You start believing your own propaganda. Then I see a way for escalation. And unfortunately, in my view, the West and Western Europe, to a great degree, are funding this Russian war in Ukraine and Russian expansionism and imperialism through purchases of Russian energy resources. So to paraphrase Lenin, they will sell us the rope. We are paying for their rope, with which at this point Ukraine is being hanged, but we also see the expansion of provocations into the Baltic states and elsewhere, even in a place like Karelia, part of the Kola Peninsula near the Finnish border. Recently, Mr. Patrushev, the head of the Russian Security Council, said there is an increase in Finnish nationalism supported by Finland. So this, even I can interpret it as Finland now being under some amount of pressure. So to be more specific, here is a graph of the supplies of natural gas for Europe 2013. You can see the indigenous production, 34%, and specifically Norway, 31%. The problem with that is that the indigenous production, the Netherlands offshore, UK, is going down. And the Russian part of that was 27%, but Russia, of course, you know, used that 3 times to put pressure on the European gas supply. There were sanctions on Europe, or interruptions of supply, and you also see how uneven the picture is. Austria, for example, over 60% of Russian supply, whereas Belgium has no Russian supply. The next one is Bulgaria, was probably close to 100% Russian supply, etc. So everything you see in green is a Russian supply. So in Central, Eastern, and especially Southeastern Europe, places like Croatia, Bulgaria, and further north, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and all the way up to Finland, the Russian supply is extremely significant. And when things escalate in Ukraine, you have interruptions. And in 2009, when Putin decided to stop, first they dropped 50% of supply because of the debates over the Ukrainian price. and then it was interrupted for about 2 weeks, with temperatures in Europe being 0 Fahrenheit, and some people died. There were states of emergency declared, the factory shut. So that experience informs the European position on Russia when Russia commits acts of aggression in Ukraine. And you see in countries such as Hungary, Czech Republic, voices at the highest level are quite loud to tone down the sanctions. Also Greece. Prime Minister Tsipras went to Moscow and said repeatedly that we Greeks are trying to convince the EU to stop the sanctions. I think he said that this is declaration of economic war on Russia because Mr. Tsipras was trying to get some serious money from Vladimir Vladimirovich. So the idea today, to bring it sort of to present time, oops. The idea today is to bring Russian gas to Turkey, build something called the Turkish Stream to the border area of Turkey and Greece, and then build infrastructure in Greece, and then provide this gas either across the Adriatic to Italy or take it north through the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia to Serbia, to Hungary, and then to Baumgarten or another hub in Europe. So what are we talking about is the old, okay, you don't have it here, the old Russian South Stream project that was supposed to go from Russia across the Black Sea into Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and into Austria. Because of the EU pressure after the Crimea and the Ukraine war, the Russians came to the conclusion that this is not going to fly, but the same 60 billion cubic meters a year, 60 BCM, as we call it, they now want to route it through Turkey and into Greece and then into Europe. And the question is also, how are you going to fund something that costs at least $30 billion, possibly more, when Russia needs to find $100 billion for the Power of Siberia project, taking the Eastern Siberian gas to China, and another $50 billion for another gas pipeline to Altai, additional probably $100 billion for LNG projects, the Arctic projects, the offshore projects, and the total reserves in Russia today, government reserves, are $300 billion, whereas corporate debt is twice as large, $600 billion. So Russia net-net, and a lot of these corporations are state-owned, net-net is already in the red, and there is a serious talk, literally in the last week, about a $95 billion EU suit against Gazprom, and a $50 billion award for the Yukos shareholders. Yukos was the oil company that Putin took from Khodorkovsky. $50 billion award already awarded, going to an appeal, and the appeal is in Holland. So after Malaysia Flight 17, it's hard for me to imagine, although I have no doubt in impartiality of the Dutch arbitrators, but I have hard time to envisage how they throw out that award. So what is the upshot of what we're talking about? The upshot is that for European energy security, we need to look for additional sources of gas. They can come from the Caspian, where Shah Deniz 2 is prospected and being developed, for the southern corridor pipeline that is called TANAP, Trans-Anatolian Pipeline, via Georgia. The map is not well done, not surprising, but from Georgia into Turkey, and then from Turkey via Greece and Albania to Italy. And of course, Russians are fighting it tooth and nail. Possibly, and with great difficulty, if the Europeans convince Turkmenistan, which has fourth largest gas reserves in the world, to connect, and there's a short 100-kilometer connection here, to the Azerbaijani system. You can bring gas from Turkmenistan. If the agreement with Iran is successfully negotiated, you can connect huge reserves of the Iranian gas to the Trans-Anatolian Pipeline as well, and the Turks said that explicitly. Moreover, from Iraq, there is gas in Kurdistan and gas more generally in Iraq itself in huge amounts, 70 billion cubic meters a year, most of which is flared. They're just burning it, contributed to the global warming. Instead, this is cash for the impoverished Kurds and other Iraqis. So you have that. Next. And it was only half tongue-in-cheek, pipelines for peace or whatever. Israel and Cyprus have tremendous offshore gas reserves. The Tamar and the Leviathan fields in Israel and the Aphrodite field in Cyprus, they already are signing with British Gas, which is acquired by Shell, an agreement with the Egyptians to sell some of this gas to the huge 80+ million people Egyptian market. They are talking to the Jordanians. So I can envisage one day, inshallah, that the gas development in the Eastern Med will be a skeleton of the future peace relationship, at least between Egypt and Israel. Egypt sold Israel gas by pipe, and that was blown up by the elements of Al-Qaeda in Sinai. But the Cypriots and the Israelis are looking for a solution for their offshore gas. The easiest solution would be to go up northeast to Turkey and then connect to the Turkish system and to the Turkish market. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Erdogan, with his anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic rhetoric and anti-Greek position, is not making this project possible at this time. So what the Cypriots and the Greeks can do, theoretically, they could build a pipeline, underwater pipeline in the Mediterranean from Cyprus to carry gas to Crete, and then jump to Peloponnesus and then into Europe. That would be nice. The problem with that is that the depth of water here is very deep, and the length is, I think, 800 clicks to 1,000 clicks, and this will be one very expensive pipeline. If not pipeline, then what? Who knows? What is the alternative? If you have gas, what else can you do with gas if you can, pipeline? Ship how? Right, LNG, liquid natural gas. The problem with that is a huge capital investment up front, probably in excess of $2 billion, and then the discussion is now whether to locate it, to site it in Cyprus onshore. New technology, never tried. LNG offshore. Israelis are very reluctant because wherever you site it in Israel, if you site it, first of all, the coastal plain is densely populated and built up, but secondly, both from Gaza and from Lebanon, it's all in the range of rockets. And they are afraid, clearly, that an LNG plant or tank hit by a rocket is not a good idea. Let's talk about some other folks. Oops. Yeah. Iran. Iran has second largest gas reserves in the world after Russia. Between Qatar and Iran, There is the South Pars field. It's one giant field. The Qataris are sitting already on $1 trillion cushion. $1 trillion. When you watch Al Jazeera, this is your natural gas money at work. And the Qataris are exporting. They have a huge infrastructure, all 250,000 of them. As Prince Bandar of Saudi Arabia said, a gas station and a TV channel do not make you a state. But seriously, a lot of money makes you a city-state at least. So the Qataris have part of the South Pars field, and the Iranians have the other part. So the incentive on the Iranian elites to settle the nuclear program issue so that they can jump into this LNG game. And LNG is becoming a commodity. We're going to ship it from the United States. Australians are shipping it. Russians are shipping it. Everybody's jumping into this game that LNG can be shipped anywhere in the world on a tanker. Therefore, in Europe, where you have LNG terminals marked in green and under construction marked in red, and the prospective terminal is marked in yellow, Europe, theoretically speaking, could replace all of its Russian gas with LNG, liquefied natural gas, shipped from anywhere. Qatar, US, Eastern Med, and piped from Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, etc. So the alternatives are there, the political risks are high, and the capital is necessary in order to invest into the infrastructure. But I'll ask you this, what is the price of freedom? If you do not invest in your energy security, you will pay Mr. Putin and Mr. Patrushev for their adventures in imperialism. Specifically in Europe, I would just single out a couple. Off the coast of Croatia, there's a Krk, K-R-K, no vowels, island, Krk island. This is one project for LNG. Swiatkowski is another project for Poland, to be constructed, I believe, this year to be finished. A floating facility called Independence in Klaipėda in Lithuania, and then the Estonians and the Finns are talking about doing one together, and Latvians are thinking about one also. What does this tell me? This tells me that still the Baltic Hanseatic cooperation is not there yet exactly, because why on earth smallish markets like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania would need 3 LNG terminals? They don't. They could either go from Swiatkowski with a pipe going east, or have one somewhere in the Baltic states and then have little spurs. Let's say if you site it in the middle in Latvia, you can have a spur to Estonia, spur to Lithuania, take care of that. So this is one example. Let's talk about some other examples of what Europeans could do to improve their interconnectors. And I don't have a good map here, but if you put LNG in Poland, you can take what is called a vertical interconnector south, take it through Slovakia, and there's some existing pipes you could connect Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and then into Romania and into Croatia. I don't have a map here, but basically Central and Eastern European interconnector going north-south. Another very important interconnector that needs to be built desperately is between Spain and France. Spain has numerous LNG terminals, but no connection to France. What does that mean? It means that the Spanish LNG terminals, this is a different map, this is a shale gas map. The Spanish LNG terminals are loaded only to 20 to 40% of capacity. And all this Qatari, American, you name it, gas, Nigerian, Algerian liquid natural gas is not reaching Europe. So sometimes they buy and they divert the tanker and ship it to Asia when the Asian prices were much higher. So interconnectors are very, very important. Lithuania now putting an LNG floating terminal in Klaipėda will be able to ship LNG not just for itself but also north to Latvia. So they're talking about that interconnector. So all these interconnectors have a great role. An interconnector between Slovakia and Ukraine is a lifesaver for our Ukrainian friends. Well, we can look at it here. Yep. So between Slovakia and Ukraine, and this is Russian gas that's being shipped to Slovakia, and then realistically, meaning the Russian molecules, or virtually without the gas even crossing. This is a technical trick. It's hard to explain. The gas does not really cross, but the meter is clicking that it went to Slovakia, and then it goes actually to Ukraine, to the great concern of Gazprom. And I had that little, okay, I don't have it. Okay, another big source of gas for Europe is Africa. Currently, Algeria is supplying large amount of gas. There's gas in Nigeria also, currently shipped by tanker, LNG. There is a talk about building a pipeline across the Sahara Desert, but there is one big problem there, going through northern Nigeria and southern Algeria. What do you think the problem is? What's that? What? Well, we're not talking about religion here. The evildoers, the radical, what are they called?
Violent extremists.
Here we go. This is why we have Professor Gorter here. Radical, violent extremists. Well, they're violent extremists here too, actually, but a lot of people want to do business with them. Doing business with violent extremists, that's a good topic for a seminar. Oops, I'm going in the wrong direction here. Okay, a little bit about Norway. Norway is still offshore, huge gas province. Their gas is expensive. There was a field that they wanted to develop together with the Russians, Stockman field, very expensive, and they decided not to develop it because the economics of that project are not there. But what does it tell me? It tells me that a lot of the Russian projects further north in the Arctic Ocean, here the Kara Sea off Novaya Zemlya, etc., these projects are currently not economically viable. Western Europe interconnectors, of course, are good. It's a very developed network, as you can see. And initially, before the Ukraine war, the Russians were thinking about extending some interconnectors and selling gas into Holland, France, and UK. Whether this is going to happen now is a question. Yeah, this is the interconnector I mentioned before of Slovak gas. There's one pipe going from Russia, and then the other pipe goes back to Ukraine. This was a lifesaver for Ukrainians this year. Finally, the shale gas. Shale gas, of course, is very much an American thing. We do it not only because we have huge amounts all the way, imagine, under the Appalachian Ridge all the way from Alabama to upstate New York, and elsewhere, Texas, the Dakotas, etc. The Europeans have it. It's not that they don't have it. What they don't have is a legal system to allow landowners to benefit from drilling for shale, and they have a stronger environmental movement that, of course, blocks it in a much more aggressive way. And I would add that in places like Bulgaria, there's a lot of chatter that the Russians gave them money. And you see the little red circle and a cross. The Russians managed to stop exploration for shale. The French nuclear industry managed to do the same in France. Who else we have here? Luxembourg, Netherlands, etc. But here's the dilemma. If you don't develop your own shale gas, if you are dismantling your nuclear, if you don't want coal because of global warming and pollution, how are you going to fund or how are you going to provide reliable and cheap energy for your industry, how are you going to compete with the rising powers of China, India, with the United States that has plentiful energy? Our energy prices are probably 2-3 times cheaper than in Europe right now. It's a tremendous advantage for us. So the Europeans have big think to think about, whereas by the way, the Russians have tons of shale gas, the Bovanenkovo structure in Western Siberia under the Tyumen and the current huge Western Siberian fields. They have probably as much gas as they exploited. So they need the technology, they need the capital, and guess what? It's not coming as long as they behave in Ukraine the way they behave. Finally, thank you very much. We are here for all your political risk and other oil and gas development needs. Here's the phone, email, give me a call if you have something to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. And now it's my distinct pleasure to invite Dr. Swiatkowski Cannon to address us. She is the chief economist of the Texas First Investment Management Company, but more importantly, she is a true expert on the privatization of the region. I am not an economist, but I can declare to you, if you want to understand Central and Eastern Europe, you must understand the history of privatization. Many things will become evident to you that are otherwise unclear. So, she will talk to us about the situation today. Please, Dr. Cannon.
Good morning. I want to say that basically I'm going to talk about geopolitical risks and their economic implications. So basically the Russian invasion of Ukraine constitutes a geopolitical risk to the world, but especially to Europe. And that means it has an impact on the politics and economics and availability and price of energy in other countries. And despite the seriousness of the situation, the financial markets are relatively calm. The reason for it is because they are two great shock absorbers in the world economy. And these are shale gas and the quantitative easing programs of the central banks in the United States, China, Japan, and now Europe. And basically, the central bank interventions have muted economic reactions to geopolitical risks. And they are designed to essentially dampen shocks to world economy because of any cause. So a lot of people talk about already the collapse of the oil prices last June, and this is almost entirely due to the US shale gas producers who made the United States the biggest gas producer and soon to be the biggest oil producer in the world. This collapse, price collapse, basically constitutes savings to world economy. And it's a great shot in the arm because the Western economies are still fairly weak because of the 2008 financial crisis. I want to say also that the Western sanctions that the West imposed on Russia because of its behavior in Ukraine have been very selective, and they are designed not to damage Western economies, basically. They are designed not to jeopardize gas supplies to Europe and also not to jeopardize the repayment of $150 billion worth of debt that Russian companies owe to the West. And the counter-sanctions that Russia imposed on the European Union in turn are also very selective, and they mainly only deal with the ban of imports of food from the European Union. So the situation in Eastern and Central Europe is more precarious because they are more vulnerable to geopolitical risk. They are close to Russia. They are almost 100% dependent on Russian energy supplies. And also they have these traditional extensive trade relationships. I also have to say that Russia did not invest that much in these countries, so it can sort of afford to be harsher. So Central Europe is basically located between Russia and Ukraine, which are in recession, and the Eurozone, which is in recovery. So what was the effect of the Ukraine crisis on Central European economies? And I'm going to talk primarily about Poland. So basically, the energy situation can be analyzed in terms of two main factors, accessibility and price. So right now, the Russian energy supplies are flowing to Eastern Europe, but they are under constant threat of these political disruptions. So it's very important to diversify. However, Poland did almost nothing in order to diversify its energy supplies. There were plans to build a gas pipeline to Norway, but Communist Prime Minister Leszek Miller vetoed it. There were plans to build LNG terminal in Świnoujście to be able to import LNG from Qatar. The terminal is being built, but a contract was given to an Italian company whose only client is Gazprom, and it is threatened to be taken over by Gazprom. So there are interminable delays and demands for additional payments. The date of completion has been moved back several times, so there is uncertainty about its future. Yes, so they said they will do it in December, but they already said, 4 times that they will do it previously. Poland also had plans to exploit its considerable shale gas resources. There was great excitement, and major Western corporations set up offices and acquired leases for exploration. 2007 law on shale gas promised to regulate participation of foreign investors, set up environmental standards, and establish levels of taxation. However, the government of Jarosław Kaczyński lost the election before the law could be enacted. The new civic platform government of Donald Tusk was not in any hurry to promote shale gas. It did not propose its own version of new law until 2014. In the meantime, major Western gas companies left for greener pastures elsewhere. In addition to such long investment uncertainty, they also encountered technical difficulties, such as different geological conditions which necessitate modification of technologies. Further, the Polish tax rate was established at 40%, while the tax rate in Britain is 30%, and in the US it's about 20%. In view of such unfavorable conditions, major companies left, and there is no interest in returning. Shale gas has been discovered in multiple locations around the world where geological and legal conditions are better. Poland no longer has advantage of being the first. Right now, the price of gas is too low to invest in shale gas. When economic conditions improve, the thrust of US gas companies will be towards Ukraine, where the US government is currently leading efforts at reform of the energy sector. Ukraine will need major economic bolstering, and Russia is likely to threaten its energy supplies. There will be major incentives to invest in Ukraine. Thus, shale gas is a lost opportunity for Poland. Poland actually became even more dependent on Russian energy supplies because it is buying coal from Russia, even though it has its own large deposits. Russian coal is cheaper because it does not have to observe the EU environmental regulations and pay taxes. In addition, many coal mines are fully exploited at the current level. They need new investment to build deeper shafts or convert to new technologies, such as gasification of gas. A few experiments in this direction are being conducted, but the Polish government does not want to allow foreign investment in this program, so there is no forward movement. The only area where progress has been made is in construction of interconnectors between pipelines of different countries. So if supplies are cut off in one country, you can still get gas from another country. Thus, Poland is connected to the European Union gas system, and it can obtain gas elsewhere. Right now, the main effort is to expand this system to all EU members. So, by the way, there is a special program called Connecting Europe Facility, and it has special investment fund associated with it. So the European Union is actually subsidizing it. Right now, construction is about to start on an interconnector to provide the Baltic countries with the same basic security and to connect them to Poland and onto the European gas system. Polska agreed just a few days ago to build a similar interconnector to the Czech Republic. Construction already started on the interconnector between Poland and Slovakia. In addition, Lithuania managed to construct its own LNG terminal and to start operations on a mobile platform. So basically, even Poland, supposedly, once this interconnector is built, Poland could supposedly also get gas maybe from the Lithuanian port, if there is a connection. In any case, they are talking about it. There are also plans to connect the Czech Republic to the Polish LNG terminal in Świnoujście. So the price of oil collapsed last June to $50 a barrel. And even though recovered somewhat lately, it still constitutes substantial savings for world economies. It is estimated that Poland will save 7 billion zlotys, which is over $2 billion, in the years 2014-2016. But the prices are different for different countries that they actually pay Gazprom as secret. However, this month, the Russian press agency Interfax revealed average prices paid by some European countries, with the exception of the Baltics, in the years 2012, 13, and 14. So here they said that Poland paid the highest average price for gas in Europe. It was about $500 per 1,000 cubic meters in 2012, while Western Europe paid $440. In 2013, Poland paid $429 and the West $385. In 2014, Poland paid $379 and Western Europe $341. Thus, Poland paid considerably more than countries that are much richer. The terms of trade were even more unfavorable. In 2010, the current Polish government signed a new contract with Gazprom until 2022. First of all, the price of Russian gas in Western Europe is linked to the spot price for gas. But in the case of Poland, it is linked to the price of oil, which makes it much more expensive. It also has such features as prohibition to export and take and pay, where you must pay for gas even if you are not able to use it. And this contract, designed to deepen Russian control of energy market in Poland, was signed at the height of the Polish-Russian reconciliation honeymoon. Aware that Poland has the most unfavorable conditions for the purchase of Russian gas, the Polish government proposed an energy union where the European Union as a whole would buy gas from Russia. For all 28 members, member countries would be obliged to help each other in a crisis, and the European Investment Bank would provide 75% of funds for new energy infrastructure. So far, there is no interest in this program because it favors mainly East European countries. However, a few days ago, again, a decision was made that is the European Commission's answer to these anti-competitive provisions of Gazprom contracts. So the Commission accused Gazprom of abuse of its market position and of illegal efforts to keep control over transmission infrastructure in Central European countries. Further, the European Commission is questioning the link between gas and oil prices, which permits Gazprom to discriminate against some customers. Now Gazprom must answer these charges and hopefully modify its practices. Thus, Europe remains dependent on Russian gas for its economic needs, and Eastern Europe is almost 100% dependent. But the interconnector system and the LNG ports can provide alternative gas in an emergency. What other measures can Europe take to improve its energy security in the future? The United States and the European Union began to negotiate the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement. It is expected that in the future the US will export its shale gas to Europe, and this will make Europe more independent of Russian gas. However, this agreement will take a long time to negotiate and implement, and it will cause great dislocation to industries in both countries. The best bet for Europe would be to develop its own shale gas resources. The European industry favors it, but the environmental lobby is still very strong. Right now, the European Union is imposing stricter environmental standards and demands to cut the use of fossil fuels with heavy fines for non-compliance. Thus, the energy system in Europe consists of subsidies for desirable kinds of energy, like solar and wind, and of penalties for non-desirable kinds of energy, such as coal. It is heavily politicized, with various groups lobbying for favorable financial incentives. These can be suddenly changed, as when Spain cut off its solar subsidies when it could no longer afford them. Europe badly needs a new energy infrastructure as well as power capacity, but it is not being built. It is very expensive, and it is impossible to plan ahead without having an idea of what the prices are going to be. With the system of subsidies and penalties, which can rapidly be changed, businesses do not want to invest. Thus, reliance on the current system of dependence on Russia is continuing. The current crisis in Ukraine did not propel Europe in new energy directions. The financial crisis is lingering, and the European Central Bank is trying new measures to revive economic growth in Europe. Europe, Japan, and China are copying US Federal Reserve policies, but the euro area is very cautious and clearly lagging behind. The European Central Bank quantitative easing program has three components: zero or negative interest rates, a program for private sector, while the bank is buying 1 trillion euros worth of covered bonds and bundles of loans in order to encourage private lending to business. And the third component, which only started last month in March, is for the bank to buy sovereign bonds at the rate of $60 billion euros a month. Its first impact was to depreciate the euro and make it almost equal to the dollar for the first time. Its impact on the economy is still uncertain, but there is investor interest in Europe and expectations of recovery. There are stirrings of life in the Eurozone. Its impact on Central Europe is also positive. Yields on Central European government bonds are at all-time lows. Their currencies appreciated in relation to the euro, but depreciated in relation to the dollar. Overall, the economic growth in Europe is highly differentiated by region. Between lower energy prices, recovering Eurozone, and the quantitative easing program, Central European economies experienced steady economic growth. They also received an additional boost from exports, despite counter-sanctions on their exports to Russia. All their exports increased, except for Estonia for some reason. The best economic performer was Hungary, but others accelerated the growth over the previous year as well. Poland is one of the countries strongly impacted by Russian counter-sanctions on its food, fruits, and vegetables, but it is not suffering as much as it was expected. Some food is getting through to Russia through Kaliningrad, which has an open border with Poland, and through Belarus. However, this trade was always highly politicized and insecure. So the Polish government took a decision to diversify the exports away from Russia, but also away from the Eurozone. The Ministry of the Economy allocated 1 billion zlotys, which is over $300 million, to promote economic cooperation with third countries. It opened trade and investment offices within its embassies. It is signing trade and investment protection agreements with the governments of other countries. It is applying for food licenses. It started a special promotion program called Go India and Go Arabia, and intensified economic dialogue with numerous other countries. The preliminary results are good and will be even better once these measures are implemented. Polish exports grew by 5.2% last year. In addition to quantitative easing program, new infrastructure investment program, and other reforms, the European Union leaders are trying to restore confidence in the euro. As a result, Poland and other countries in Central Europe are under heavy pressure to join the euro. Right now, the Baltic states, Slovakia and Slovenia, adopted the euro. Poland and other countries did not. Previously, the issue was the timing of such a move. Now, the public debate is whether Poland should adopt euro at all. As with all issues, there are costs and benefits. What are the benefits? The most important is that adoption of the euro would eliminate the currency risk for enterprises. However, enterprises in Central Europe basically are buying currency options. They are hedging their currency risk. There would be access to new financing sources, but the large enterprises in Central Europe have full access to financing options in Western Europe. There will be increased foreign investment, but currency risk is actually a very small part of a decision to invest. It would eliminate transaction costs, but again, these are rather small. There would be dynamic development of internal EU trade, but actually the trade within the European Union is the slowest of them all, and the most dynamic trade is outside of the European Union. What are the costs? Well, the main cost would be the loss of right to issue own currency, which is extremely significant. There will be loss of currency reserves. Poland has $100 billion of currency reserves right now, and it would have to turn over most of it to the European Central Bank. There will be loss of independent monetary policy, currency policy, interest rate policy. And another very important consideration is that the decisions at the European Central Banks and basically the decision-making process is unfavorable to smaller countries. The decisions are made to suit the largest countries. So these costs and benefits make an issue of, raise certain issues. And I think they are extremely important. So for example, the costs of joining the euro must be paid at the very beginning, while the benefits are uncertain, potential, and far into the future. Another issue is that economic integration of the euro area leads to sectoral specialization among different countries. So there is a danger that Poland might be frozen in its current economic situation of concentration on production of labor-intensive products, and it could actually set back its modernization efforts. Also, yes, also essentially because these countries specialize in different industries and different areas, when you have an outside shock, it affects different sectors differently and therefore different countries differently. And you have one policy within the euro area, it cannot deal with these shocks because they are not designed to differentiate. And also the question is that right now, the countries that are inside the euro have much weaker economic results than the countries outside the euro. So basically, the consensus conclusion in Poland is that Poland would be better off if real economic convergence occurred before adopting the euro, which means that the standard of living in Poland would have to be closer to what is average in Western Europe. And right now, Poland has only 64%, is at the level of 64% of average living standard in Western Europe. And therefore, the consensus decision among economists in Poland is to put off a decision to join the euro. So in conclusion, I wanted to say that there are considerable threats to considerable geopolitical threats to fragile Central European economies, but they have been neutralized for now through skillful economic policies, which creates a window of opportunity to conduct essentially deeper structural reforms that will make them stronger for the future.
Thank you, Dr. Well, there's packaging, and there's spin, and then there's reality. Whether it's the reality of pipelines and ports, or the reality of what the EU mandates and requires of its members. And I think we've had a very, very sober analysis of what the reality is in both of those sectors. So please, we have a little time before our lunch. We have a question in the back, right in the back, please.
My name is Krzysztof Staszewski. I'm at Illinois State University. I have a reality check question, actually. Most of energy industry worldwide is state-owned enterprises. The United States is an exception where it's mostly private. And yet the shale gas and fracking revolution was done mostly by companies that were not in the mainstream, not the dominant one, but startups. So should I call them upstarts, really? Companies that in many ways went against the mainstream. And my question is this: can we really envision doing these new technologies in places where it's mostly state-owned enterprises, very bureaucratic, very heavy over the industry, where in the US it was the ability to go outside the system that created this industry. And are we hoping too much? And shouldn't we be rather working on the structure, bureaucratic structure, and more private property for energy industry? Because then it will happen naturally, because the technology is already there. So I welcome your comments on this.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. The shale upstarts, do they have a chance with the big boys?
You can't argue with success, and I think this is an opportunity. I always sort of skeptically looked at this adage or this saying that don't let a crisis escape and give you an opportunity. But I think Europe has this opportunity. It has a crisis because they recognize that they need to do something about the energy policy. And I think Lucja Swiatkowski is absolutely correct that the political pressures to subsidize the renewables, to kill coal and nuclear, etc., are what in the time of Nikita Khrushchev was called a harebrained scheme. But this is an opportunity for Europe. Create property rights so that people can allow shale development and drilling and hydraulic fracturing. There were no significant incidents caused by fracking in the United States. Allow access to the three things that you need. You need the legal structure, you need access to capital, because these mom and pop companies in the US could develop it because they could go and get capital to invest in the new equipment. And thirdly, take a good look at your political and regulatory policy, and do not allow the competitors to kill politically shale, as they did in Bulgaria and France. And the example of Poland is a sad example, because Poland could have benefited a lot from shale. I think the decision to go with the big boys was a wrong decision. It was not the Exxons and the Chevrons that developed the American shale. It was much smaller companies, and Poland should have created a regulatory environment that allowed smaller companies to move in and do it.
But I want to say that there were small companies there. All these American companies, I attended a wedding in Dallas at some point at the Dallas Petroleum Club, and virtually everybody there was these small shale gas producers in the US, and they were all in Poland, and they had no tradition of going there, yet they went there because there was this great opportunity. But unfortunately, I mean, I think that the situation in Poland, in generally in diversification of energy, it was either extreme incompetence or it was sabotage, because you could not do as badly unless you tried, essentially. And this was one issue, yes. And the other thing was that there was an article a week ago in the Financial Times, and 2 years ago when I was here, I gave a presentation about how Polish economy is bifurcated, and there are basically foreign companies that are being subsidized and favored in every way by the Polish government, and the medium and small companies in Poland are treated very well. Where the Financial Times article said that the Polish government is starting to treat the foreign companies badly, and you can especially see it in this energy sector. I know people from Texas who went to Poland who wanted to do gasification of gas in these coal mines, which are basically dead, and they wouldn't let them do it. Why not? That's what they are for.
You mentioned Ukraine before, and I would just tell you, I was in Ukraine a month ago, a little bit more than 6 weeks ago, and the issue we dealt with was taxation on new exploration and production in Ukraine. Don't worry, Americans are not going near that place yet, because the tax rates for the government companies in exploration and production of oil and gas in Ukraine is 70% of the overall production, not of profit, of the overall output, 70%, 55% on wells under 5 kilometers, and 31% on wells over 5 kilometers. It is a suicide. It is an oil and gas tax seppuku that the Ukrainians are committing, and there's two major classes of players that benefit from that. One is Gazprom, that it continues to sell now gas at a much lower price. Ukrainians, I was reviewing the materials towards this presentation, and historic prices, as you mentioned, were close to $400 per 1,000 cubic meters. Now the Russians are selling at $250. And the second class of investors are those oligarchs who have a local presence and a long sort of breadth, and they're running a long distance. So the small guys will be thrown out and killed by this punitive taxation, and then the oligarchs and the Russians will remain there.
Okay, but
Can you give her the other microphone?
Oh, this one is not working.
No, it's not working.
this one's not working.
No.
Oops.
Okay, I want to say that even if the tax rates are very high, usually there is a honeymoon period. So for first couple of years, like even in Poland, also for the first, until I think 2020 or something, basically you don't pay while you are looking, because it costs several $1 million just to drill a well, and you might not find anything there. You must drill a lot of wells to find out exactly where the deposits are. I spoke to Carlos Pascual, who used to be Obama's ambassador for energy, and he was also ambassador to Ukraine, and he claims they are very involved to eliminate corruption and to especially put in the right legislation for shale gas. There was a World Shale Congress in Kiev just a few years ago, before the hostilities started. So there was a lot of interest there, because apparently the deposits are very large in Ukraine. I believe they'll do something, but again, this is what I try to emphasize about the European Union. It's not a question of taking a decision, you know, that, oh yes, we'll change, we'll be against Russia or something. No, you have to change the whole system in Europe. And this is what makes it so difficult. You have to change completely the great corporate interests who are engaged on the side of the wind energy, of the nuclear energy. They are the ones who are lobbying not to change or to, you know, make regulations more favorable to them. So it's not a decision that will become more independent from Russia or something like that. No, you have to change the whole European system. I do believe that it will happen, because I do not believe that Europe will commit suicide, and this is what it's coming to, essentially. I do believe that this transatlantic trade and investment partnership, of course, a lot depends on how it will be negotiated and who will have most influence in it, but I believe that will sweep away a lot of these European interests, and there will be revival in Europe. The question is how long it will take.
Well, thank you. We're out of time, unfortunately, but I've got a new phrase, oil tax seppuku, that I'm going to use.